You are listening to Seeking the Hidden Thing with Kryptos. Welcome to another episode of Seeking the Hidden Thing. It's a pleasure to be back with you, and it's also my distinct pleasure to once again, it's been a while, but it's a real joy to have Duncan Reyburn joining us from South Africa. So welcome, Duncan.
Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here and to get to talk to you again.
Yeah, you've, we're all both, you've been busy. I've been busy doing things. And before we were catching up a little bit about what was going on behind the scenes. But recently you wrote an article for your Substack, which eucatastrophologist. I think that's eucatastrophologist, right? That's how it's pronounced. Right. Yeah. This right. Is one of these cell phones. You come up with a name so clever that nobody can. Yeah, I know how that goes. Yeah. And I'll put a link to the piece in the bottom. But you wrote this delightful piece called "Simulating the Holy," and it touched a number of things that I have been thinking about, and I thought it would be really, really good to come on and have a conversation about it. But I think the basic theme is that in this technological world, especially in its, what we consider cutting edge technology today, the advent of these large language database of LLMs. What does the M stand for? Anyways, the large language database, what we know of as AI, represents kind of a twofold thing. On the one hand, it seems like it's an attempt to create something divine, something that is larger than ourselves, that lives on its own and can speak to us its wisdom, while at the same time also then cutting us off from God. And there was an interesting point you made in the piece, and this is something I've talked about with AI as opposed to actual intelligence. With humans, nobody knows really where thoughts come from, whereas with the algorithms, even though these are immensely complex databases and the algorithms are fairly complex, that all of it is legible. It's all, ones and zeros. It's all bytes. It's all on the computer there. If you really wanted to, you could read the whole of the database. You could understand it if you want to. Now, so much of it has been automated that a lot of the computing work is done on, the algorithms do the work that people have set it up to do. So you kind of lose control of it, and it seems to have a life of its own, but it's really fully legible. And it was one of these points that you made about the Protestant Reformation, in a sense where you make the Word of God accessible to everybody. So you put a Bible in everybody's hands and you teach them how to read. And I think the point you make about that is that in doing that, it seems like rather than making God more accessible to people, we've actually cut ourselves off from God in the process. And in part because, now, like Bernet, we're living within simulations. So we're not contacting the real. We're living within this technological simulation that we've created. And because we live within this technological simulation, it makes it very, very hard for us to access the divine, the holy. And you spend a fair bit of time talking about this. I probably said more than I really need to set it up, but just take it which way you want to go, Duncan, and sort of laying out for folks, what it is that you've been seeing and some of maybe the concerns that you have in that regard.
it's going to be, I suppose, difficult to completely summarize. But one of the things that I've noticed, and I think a lot of people have noticed, is this double reaction to AI. There's this on the one hand, this concern for the fact that this might destroy us. There's this terror that is lurking within this man-made monster. But then there's also this praise. I mean, as you say, this almost this creation of a divine structure that people have this awe for what AI can achieve and what it can potentially achieve. And so I thought it's an interesting double reaction, because it often comes from the very same people. It's not different people are saying that it's worrying, and then other people are saying it's this wonderful thing. It's that it's the same people who are saying it is both wonderful and terrible. And yet there is this tendency to treat it as an autonomous object, that AI has a kind of life of its own, and we don't have any say over what's happening with AI, and that we must therefore submit to it and just run with the laws of progress, whatever those happen to be, and carry on doing this. And so what I notice is that this double emotional response, which is articulated in the ways I've said, does reveal something about how a kind of deeper yearning that we have for something that is holy. And what I suggest is that if you look at Rudolf Otto wrote a book called The Idea of the Holy, and in it he has this quite remarkable insight about the holy being something that is it's not rational or irrational, but transrational or supra-rational. So it's just something that is above the rational. And our response to that supra-rationality, which is the spiritual and of course leads us towards what is most ultimate, or who is most ultimate is a better way of saying it, namely God. That experience of the holy actually has both of these poles. It has this feeling of awe and wonder, but it also has at the same time this feeling of terror. And so what I detect in the double-sided reverence and fear of AI is that I think many people, especially in the tech industry, they want AI to be a simulated God, a deity that replaces their actual search for God. So that's how I set it up. And I think, if you want to we can go through this bit by bit and see where it leads us.
Yeah, I think maybe the beginning is to just, because I think to explore how modernity has interrupted and disrupted this, and AI with it, of course, is to then begin by examining the idea of the holy. And for us as moderns, and this is part of the problem, we don't really have a sense of the holy, in a sense, especially since Kant, but I think it was emerging long before Kant. Kant was merely sort of the capstone of it, where he just recognized, well, we can't know anything about God definitively. Like there's nothing that we can measure there. There's nothing that we can test. There's nothing that we can prove. There's nothing that we can't reason our way through this. And so we just simply have to kind of cut that off and set it aside and focus on what we can actually know. And we just have to assume that, at certain points, some things are just going to be a priori, that we're just assume they're there, but we can't examine them. And that's fine. And so, but a priori knowledge, like I say, it's there, it's operative, but we don't really do anything with it. And so everything then becomes, in this sense, all knowledge that we know is knowable. Whereas prior to this, there was this sense of the other, something that is separate. And so you have this sort of powerful force that's on the one hand, it attracts you to it, but on the other hand, it's terrifying. So it's the mountain of God. So you know that God is up there, but you can't go up the mountain. Except for one man was invited to go up, and he met God up there on the mountain. And occasionally people tell stories of how they met God, but for the most part, God remains sort of separate and other. And then, there's this sense of, God choosing a people for him. This is the Christian point, that God chose a people for himself as a holy people that are then drawn into this otherness. And so they become something that is separate from the rest of the world and is characterized by this tremendous. So there's this sense of that if you meet God, you're going to die, that there's power there. There is something pure and good, or there's also something fierce and terrible. There's judgment. There is, it's all kind of wrapped up into it. And so, but at the same time, this is a thing, and this is again, the biblical story, is that the biblical story tells a time when we used to walk in the cool of the morning with this tremendous, with this very fearsome, tremendous sort of being, this otherness, the holy. And it was in some sense okay, but now it's not okay. And so we have this yearning, because we were cast out of the garden. We can't go up the mountain, that we want to go up there, but yet we can't, and we'll die. And yet there is this sense too, like with Moses, that all of the laws and the rules of life come from up on top of this mountain. And so in a sense, we need it to order our society. Whatever this is up there on the top of the mountain, we need it to order our society, but we can't go up the mountain. And so there's this whole kind of, and it's very odd to talk about it, but there's this very sort of relationship with it where in a sense, you need God terrifyingly up on the mountain, but yet at the same time, you can't go up on the mountain. And, this is the thing that you note in the biblical story. The real problem is God is that he's not far away. But the real problem with God is that he wants to live right in the middle of you, that he wants to set up his tent right in the middle of the camp, right? And you're going like, okay, this is not going to go well, right? So you have, the pillar of fire that is there, the symbolizing the glory of God in the presence of the temple. But so there's all these rules that you have to go in. So there's this series of layers that you enter into, and there's the final curtain. And again, like Moses, only one man and only once a year can come into the Holy of Holies and meet with God and give him a sacrifice, right? And so there's all of these, but yet at the same time, you need and want God right in the middle of the camp, but yet you know that him being in the camp is a continual threat to your existence as a people. And as moderns, with following Kant, we've just said, yeah, we don't need that. We can figure it out on our own. Because we can't know anything about that anyways. So whatever, it's all cut off from us. You can't know anything, like what's going on inside the Holy of Holies. You can't know what's going on in there anyway. So whatever, we're just done with that. And that's what we did. And yet at the same time, so you figure throughout all of history, there's been this relationship with the holy, and especially in the biblical and the Christian tradition. And then we as moderns just decided to dispense with it because we couldn't understand it. And you're just like, like that, mind blowing, but that's kind of where we are. So that's, I think, sort of sets up sort of the modern problem, but now you're inside the system and you're trapped in there. So now what do you do? Right. So those desires still don't go away. And I think you're right. This is kind of where certain things like AI have come into place.
What I find really interesting about the modern reaction is that it wants to place the terror and the wonder, if those are our poles, it wants to place those in separate domains. And I think with the holy, the reality of the holy is that it is paradoxical. It is both of those things at the same time. And so modernity wants to go, well, if I'm afraid of it, and of course fear is that, I suppose, that deepest experience of not being in control. And the modern frame is essentially a frame about making things more and more controllable. Even the entire trajectory of modernity towards hard sciences, is this attempt to make things more and more transparent, I guess, as you say. Legible is a nice way of James. I think it's James Scott's written about that as the logic of the state is to make everything legible. It's got to be perfectly.
That's right. Yeah.
Capturable by your conscious mind. And
How to Think Like a State is the book. That's right. Yeah. Sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, that's completely fine. So I find that really interesting, that as we make the world more legible, we tend to evacuate all that is fearful and other and unknown to sort of this, to something that we should not have a concern about. And so that it creates, in effect, it creates this idea of God as tame, essentially tame. And I think this is something that C.S. Lewis tries to undo with his character of Aslan in his Narnia books, where Aslan is both love and terror. And you even see this double reaction throughout those books of all the characters really not knowing what to do. And that's very interesting, what to do with this double experience. And I think AI, very interestingly, is built on the legible. It's built on, firstly, reductionist logic, because, of course, artificial intelligence is interpreted as intelligent only according to its function. It's intelligent. I mean, that was even the earliest researchers on AI. I think of the Dartmouth conference, that was where it was first formulated. The idea of AI was formulated, was this idea that as soon as something is, you would call something artificially intelligent if it were intelligent for a human being to do that very same thing, and you would then call the person intelligent, which is a complicated way of saying it. But it's helpful to realize, oh, this has got an entirely functional or functionalist view of the world. And of course, the holy is, I mean, I want to almost overstate the case and say the holy is the dysfunctional, but it's that which transcends functionality.
Well, it's in a sense, there is a wild untameness about it, in a sense that you can't tame it. It's dangerous and risky. And this is the thing that people, like, when you really read the scriptures, right? You know, you talk about this, and people in the modern world have a very hard time with this, but we would kind of look at it this way, as like the dark side of God, right? Yeah. Whereas the ancients would just see it as God is something that you can't, as the creator of the universe, is a force that you cannot control. Like, you have no mastery over it. He masters you, you don't master it. Right. And that's a sense of, like, this is this force that you never quite gain mastery over, or you never gain mastery over it at all. Like, this is why you can't even have the name of God, because you have no mastery over who God, but yet he invites you to journey along with him. You know, I will be with you. I will be whom I will be, or like, I will be with you as I will be with you. Right. Because the Hebrew verbs are very fungible in that regard. Right. So it's, but I think something you said there is very interesting, Duncan, is that the idea of a simulation. So if you can run a simulation of an intelligent human being, and you can make your simulation so effective that it's indistinguishable from real intelligence, does it then become the real thing? And there are those that would argue that, yes, it is. And this, I think, really this is ultimately the crux of the point, I think, that you're making, and that really intrigued me, is that, no, it's not the same thing. Because this thing that you've created is entirely legible and within your control. Therefore, it's not the real thing.
And I think that's what we know, is that AI has no experience of itself coming up with anything.
No, it's just a simulation.
And so, I mean, it links to much of what Heidegger was trying to do when he started formulating his thinking around being and time, and before that, where he started realizing that there's this tendency in the modern world to think of cognition, the way we think about things, as only that which appears on the surface. So in terms of names and categories and those sorts of things, whereas he was trying to go, no, but being, whatever. I mean, Heidegger's ultimately got a violent sense of the logos, so he's not someone to follow too much. But one of the things that he does help us to see is that there is a much richer world that exists well before and well after that which is articulated in specific reasonable terms. And so he does, in fact, to my mind, help to expose the need to have a different sort of existence. I mean, I often coach my students and I say, remember that writing is everything that happens before and after you put the words down on a page, or whether you type them into a screen. What's actually going on in you as your thought world is transformed as you're thinking through things. That's the real effort of writing. Whereas I think people tend to think, no, but writing is just what's there, and therefore I must just use AI to do it for me. That kind of thing is so, it's so belittling of the human experience, which is very rich and very impossible to tie down to just what we can articulate.
Well, and if you talk to people who do thinking, right, one of the things that they will tell you that the really hard part is that you oftentimes you tend to think in wholes, so in large concepts, and then you're trying to then take something that is, it's not necessarily in words. It's something that you grasp, and you're trying to wrestle that in and confine it into a series of words on a page, knowing that you can't really do that. It's like Karl Barth says, like, we can on the one hand say nothing about God, and yet the command from God is that we are to bear witness to what we have seen and known. So now you have to wrestle and then put it into words and bear witness to it. And so you're, in a sense, you're tasked with an impossible task. It's not just, the command is never just to come to meet God. You must then speak about what you've seen and tell others about it, so that they have the same desire that you have to meet God, which is just, and so writing has that kind of character to it, where you're trying to take something ineffable and render it legible.
Yeah. And I think one of the fascinating things is that if our conception of truth, which is, I think, linked to everything that we're discussing, if our conception of truth is that truth is only that which I can capture in language and state as a proposition, then we have a very small conception of truth. Whereas if truth is a mode of participating in reality with our whole lives, then we're getting closer to something. So I may not be able to articulate it, but it's a happening. It's a gradual unfolding, and certain things become disclosed while other things fall away into darkness and invisibility, and yet the truth is still present.
Well, and the thing is, like, you and I can talk, and we can have we can have a moment where you have that moment of connection where both of us realize, like, oh, he gets it. And yet neither of us can really articulate what it is that was gotten. And I think that's important. And this is, when we get back to, we talk about like Heidegger was also the one who, in talking about technology, mentioned or came up with the idea that technology tends to frame us, right? And Ellul spoke about this too, with like the layers of technology. So on the one hand, when you have, say, a hammer or a saw, you have a tool and it removes you from the material. Like you can't fashion, say, wood or stone with your bare fingers. So you need a tool to fashion wood or stone. to make things and build fires, build houses, build chairs to sit on, all these kinds of things, right? Make clothing for yourself. And so you develop a tool, but at the basic level, you are connected to the tool, and the tool connects you to physical reality. So there's a connection between you. When you strike a hammer, you feel it, right? Now, if you develop a hammering machine, like a nail gun, there may be a certain sensation, like the nail gun still has a kind of pop to it, and you're still connected in some way, but now it's faster and easier, but you're now still a step removed from the machine. And then you develop a machine that is entirely like where you don't feel anything, and it does the nailing for you, but you're still sort of like right there standing next to the nailing machine, maybe feeding in things that need to be nailed into the nailing machine. But then the next step is that you sit in a control room, halfway around the world, and just basically run the nailing machine remotely, and so at every level of thing, you are cut off from reality. Now, on the one hand, you're still nailing stuff, but at the same time, you have no sense of what's happening. So there is this sense of this is kind of what happens. And we have to look at all of these technologies. So when you say we're going to focus on truth as that which can be articulated and that which can be measured and known and dealt with rationally, you've in a sense enframed knowledge, because now you've cut yourself off from that wild metaphysical. And so now you're almost sitting in the control room trying to do truth when you're in the control room. And then, so this was something I said to you before we got on the air. Now, if we think about this religiously, and we live in a post-Kantian world where everybody has their own Bible, and we have all of these, religious experiences in church and so forth. And, we now fashion like these like large mega churches, and all of the events are very carefully crafted to create a certain feeling and so forth. That when you look at what we do as Christians today in this kind of post-Kantian world, a really good case could be made that in our effort, and you say this in the piece, in our effort to make God accessible through, giving everybody the Bible so they can have, the truth, but the truth as limited to just what's in words, sola scriptura. So the truth as just merely limited to what's in words. And that's the containment of truth. And then you say, now this is how we meet God. You're now in a sense in the control room. Right. And so there is this sense that we live now in an experience where in our quest to not bring heresy or falseness, to purify the truth of the church in this regard, we've in a sense now cut ourselves off from God, and we're now worshiping a simulation, which is or a simulacrum of the real thing. So in some sense, there is on a level that you're still like, just as when you're in the control room, you're still nailing the boards, but now you're in a control room 3 steps removed from the actual nailing. You have no feel of the nailing process anymore. And when you cut yourself off and when you focus just on this one aspect of truth, you've actually cut yourself off from the source, which is God himself. So sort of that wild, uncontrollable, terrifying, because if you have to meet God, well, there's also demons out there who can deceive you. And, by being in the presence of God, you could be consumed by this. You could be deceived. You could everything. So let's just cut all of that sort of wildness out there where we don't have, and we'll just focus on the word. Now that we have the word, but now you're sitting in a control room. And you can see how over the course of several hundred years, this can affect the psychology of a people, where you have a control room relationship to God, and you're cut out, you're 2-3 steps removed from the actual experience of the divine. And you wonder then in a sense of like, well, no wonder in modernity, with this turn in terms of limiting truth, that we have a less and less sense and feeling of the divine. And this is something that Ian McGilchrist noted. And it's almost like a kind of mental illness that we almost can't intuit the world anymore. Like it's just that part of ourselves has withered.
Well, I think it's very helpful to look at any engagement we have with the world, with others, with God, is trained. And one of the things that happens around technology is that technology develops along the lines of palliation, which is like technology develops along the lines of trying to kill pain. So if you think of your example of moving from hammering to sort of gradually moving away from that, what you find there is this movement away from things being difficult. But what I find endlessly fascinating is that reality is manifest to us primarily as that which resists us. It's not something we conjure in our heads, and unless we're psychotic, when we're totally self-enclosed, then our sense of reality is pure simulation. Actually, it's not even a simulation; it's a simulacrum, which is where the simulation replaces reality and isn't merely a copy of it. Whereas, and that's why I think that's really deeply affecting us in terms of our relationship with God, is our relationship with the world is so heavily technologically mediated that we're making things easier and easier and easier for us. I mean, the watchword of our time is that everything is smooth. Everything has got to be quick and efficient. And if you think of, I mean, even phones that don't have buttons that you can press, there's less resistance. There's less, I mean, arguably in a certain sense, there's less reality. But on the other side of that, consciousness itself is that which resists. It creates friction so that it can perceive. And so there's this, I mean, this is very metaphysical and I suppose phenomenological. There's a conflict between two othernesses, our being and our being as conscious beings, confronting that which is resisting us. But we confront it as resistance, as a form of resistance ourselves. And in that confrontation, we experience the world. And so what we've done by making everything more legible and more artificial and more smooth is we've gradually removed ourselves from any contact with reality, such that the only form of contact with reality we can manage is the horrific. So I talk about this also in the article, where I point out that modernity creates, in some sense, it's almost, I mean, this is putting it too strongly perhaps, but almost the need to have horror, to have the world be horrific, because it's that which intrudes on us, and we can then yell at the horrific and say, that's terrible, I don't like it. Or we can celebrate it as we, you know, if as certain people did recently online where violence happens. And then you realize that actually even that response is an attempt to control that which is beyond our control. There's a lot there, but
that is such an interesting point. Yeah, that's such an interesting point, Duncan. You're right. So in a sense, we need the tremendum, like we have a hungering for the tremendum, but yet we live in a world where we've been told that we can control everything we know. And what we know is like, all things can be known, they're rational, they're, you know, and then that's where truth is. So, we create experiences for ourselves that then confront us with the truth. Like the horror movie is the example you use, but we think often of the things that like the kind of where people say like racism is a made up problem, that like nobody 75 years ago worried about race, you know what I mean? Or 100 years ago worried about racism in the same, right? In that sense. And it's almost like these are problems that we needed to create in modernity because we've in many ways eliminated all the rest of our problems. Like real problems.
Yeah. So I think that's very much what modernity encourages, is we have to make up fake problems to be able to deal with the fact that we've solved so many, supposedly. Of course, this is always an illusion. To assume that we've solved anything is always somewhat arrogant. But I think that the sense of the world being something that we can master and control creates this bizarre I think it's an unconscious often recognition that, but we cannot possibly be in control. So we must therefore manufacture more illusions as the result of the illusions we've created.
Well, yeah. And even things like, are we going to war, like on these massive industrial level scale? Are we going to engaging in these industrial scale wars just to kind of create the horrors necessary to shock us into whatever we need to shock? We feel we need to shock. I'm not even sure we know what we need to shock ourselves into anymore, because we're so cut off from anything actually holy. But yet at the same time, we almost have a subconscious need to create these horrors on a mass scale just in order to shock ourselves with them.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to me that Oppenheimer named, I don't know if he was the one who named it, but when he named the one bomb test, the Trinity, there's this. So what I maintain is, and it's basically Augustinian in its orientation. We desire God. We do desire God. There's no escaping that desire. But when we refuse to actually seek God, to seek the hidden thing, that would be a great name for a Substack or a podcast.
You'd think, eh? Yeah.
Yeah. When we fail to seek the hidden thing, we end up creating its approximate simulation, which is the idol. So those are the two options that are available to every person. It's either God or idolatry. And the idol is that which will absolutely subjugate us. We will never be free in the face of the idol. And so it may give us a little bit of a sense of the holy in the sense that it will both awe us and terrify us, but it will always diminish us, which is, I often think of that Psalm 115, which talks about the idols, the work of human hands that have mouths but do not speak, eyes that do not see, ears but do not hear. And then it's got this little payoff line: those who worship them, those who make them and worship them, become like them. So the idols we create, we end up diminishing ourselves in the face of the idol. Of course, the humorous way to put this is it's a bit like making a toaster and then worshiping it, because that's more or less what we're doing with AI if we hold it in too high of a regard. Yeah,
and this is something, because I've been thinking. I wrote, like I mentioned before we went on air, I wrote a piece for the American Reformer on spiritual warfare, and I folded in the idea of the idol, because the idol has a twofold nature. One is that it is a thing of wood or stone, so it's just it's something that we make with our hands, and so in a sense, it diminishes us. You're right, because it's a God that we make that we can control. So it's this kind of, it's that Kantian reality. So we're making a being or a thing for ourselves that we can worship, that's in our control. So it's just wood or stone. But as you say, it begins to control us. But at the other level, because we don't acknowledge in making this thing of wood and stone necessarily that, or we're not mindful of that there can very well be a demonic entity, sort of a wild spiritual entity behind the scene. And so in our devotion to this idol, we're opening up an avenue for ourselves to be controlled, like creating a portal. That's be the sort of the way we would talk about it today, but you're creating an avenue. And these are always transactional. So in a sense, we give, in a sense, so that we feel that this gives us a sense of control. So I make an offering and I get something back in return. And maybe, yes, I do get that thing back in return. I get a good harvest. I get a good pregnancy. I find the person I love. I get wealthy. I gain power, all of these kinds of things. But at the same time, then the entity that's behind this idol then also can control us and keep us in bondage, which, if you look at the system of modernity, and regard modernity as a kind of truth that we fashion truth rationally as a way to control it, then we're fashioning an idol out of truth that we can then control. And this then also puts the opportunity, like the possibility that there could be a demonic entity behind this. But then if we think about it in terms of the scriptures, and this is sort of the danger, in a sense of by, limiting truth to the scriptures, then you are trying to render it legible. And in a sense, and you see this where, people say, well, I'm a Bible believing Christian, where in a sense, the Bible, it's almost like they worship the Bible as much as they worship God. And so the Bible in a sense becomes an idol. And that then is, so this enters into sort of another whole layer of questions. And this is where we talk about, sort of when we're operating in modernity, and now that we've cut ourselves off from the actual, like the holiness of God, this holy other, you open yourself up to then all of these layers of problems. And then with AI now, you try to, within the back door, reinvent God through the machine. Now you're just being honest about what it is that you're doing. We're just going to create the ultimate idol because it's actually going to speak to us now, like the way that the other idols didn't. And you're thinking, yeah, that's going to really end well.
But I mean, it's so strange to me because I do think that so much of what's happening around AI, it's not invisible. Most people that I talk to are not excited about it. They're nervous about it. I spoke to a friend just this last weekend who lost her job because of AI coming into the industry she was working in. And so there are all of these manifest problems, and yet people don't want to do anything about what's happening. Oh, I think my family has just arrived home, so there might be some noise in the background. Yeah, so it's interesting to me how people give over to this kind of logic of no, machines will just keep going and they must keep going. The machine must take over, instead of having the wherewithal to say, maybe we should say no, maybe we should slow down and think what it means, for instance, to lead a good life, to actually have a balanced life.
I think people are starting to ask it. This is like in Aluel's final book that was translated after his death, The Technological Bluff. He finally asked that question, and he says, it talks about it, the unreason. We take every technological problem and we try to solve the problems that it generates with more technology. And he says the one answer that, and because he looks at, because every technology is ambivalent, and, it's a very Augustine, I think it's a solid Augustinian type of conception of the world that, everything is, now he doesn't quite say it because he's doing sociology in sort of the continental way. He doesn't say it in a sort of an Augustinian fashion, but anything that you introduce into the world is tainted with sin. And so whatever goods that come from it, they come tainted. And oftentimes we can pitch the goods and they are front loaded, but then the ills that often come after all of the gains have been realized. Now you then figure like, oh my word, how do we deal with all these problems? So you now have another great solution that you're going to pitch, for which all of the problems are veiled behind all of the supposed benefits, and they come later. And then so it exponent. Nobody ever says, oh my word, you know what? That's really bad. Maybe we should just stop doing that. Let's just like unplug it and shut it off, because that was I could see how we got some gains out of it, but now, maybe it's just better if we didn't anymore. But nobody does that. And he called that unreason of it all.
But I think that's what's so interesting. You mentioned Heidegger's idea of inframing, this idea that technology squeezes everything into its particular frame.
Yeah.
The fact that it's one of, I'll use a fairly simple example from education. But a lot of people in universities have been saying, you know what we must do with the large language model AI? We must insist that the AI gives us an answer and then teach students to critique the answer, which is such modern thinking in a nutshell, because then it forces students, before they've even done anything, to think in terms of the thing the machine has produced.
Yes.
And so I think that happens with this, the technological bluff, is that people are already thinking in an incredibly enclosed technological way. The solution is determined by the problem, determined in a limited sense. So the problem is actually not ever fully announcing itself. And that's something Elul and Marshall McLuhan, they're so good at pointing out, that the fact that the use of the technology seems to be, for instance, a hammer. A hammer is for hammering, right? But actually, no, a hammer is its own sort of being, and it's going to change the way you relate to the world, such that you might decide that a hammer is a great way of solving the problem of your neighbor next door being a little too noisy. And then the thing becomes a murder weapon, when that was not the intention. The hammer maker didn't intend for it to be a murder weapon, but now that's what it is. And so the technological, it's kind of a shrinkage of consciousness to think of the world in terms of the technological. The only way to deal with technology is to be able to think completely outside of it. And that's exactly what I think the recovery of the holy will be, is to really have an encounter with God, to really seek the divine, and then look again at this technological world and make certain decisions about how wholeness can be achieved in the world, even over and above these technological inventions, and not give over all of our power to these machines, because it's clearly not doing us any good.
No, but this is I think the thing that I have come to realize, that I'm beginning to characterize in my own mind and trying to work out a way. I've got a piece sort of that I'm tooling around with in my head, but it's just a matter of wrestling it into words. But this idea that the technological world establishes sort of the ground within which we live modern life. And as Elul said, it forces us into one solution for every problem. So every problem that we face has a technical response to it. And this is why, regardless of left or right in the technological society, it doesn't really matter what your political ideology is if you have battling solutions. So you have two sets, is it this technological solution or this technological solution? Nobody really stops to think that there is a deeper ideology, the ideology of the technological society itself, that says the solution is a technological solution. And so if you were to question that and said, well, maybe the solution isn't a technological solution, you then question the whole of modernity. And you have to say, maybe the solution is that we go up the mountain and we meet God. And somebody says, well, we don't do that anymore because we have the scriptures and we have the truth of God. We don't go up the mountain anymore, because if you go up the mountain, you could get deceived along the way. How do you know what you know is how does anybody, how do you verify that that's that God's talking to you when you go up the mountain? That's a good question, but it's still and then the other thing is you could have other solutions, well, maybe rather than having a technological solution, we just teach people how to be virtuous. And then you're breaking all of these different frames. But as soon as you begin to question modernity, the whole framework of modernity begins to crumble, because once you begin to question that, then you begin to question the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And it really requires that you continually maintain this sort of self-contained and framed system where every problem has its own new technological and technique-based solution. And so you just keep piling them on. And a hammer this is the other thing. Like you see this all the time, say with the gun debate, right? It's what really matters is having moral people to use guns. Well, the problem is like with hammers, yeah, you can bang nails, but as you said, you can also bash somebody's head in. And sooner or later, you're going to bash somebody's head in. Like it's implicit in the technology itself that this is what can happen. So the technology doesn't care. And this is the thing that Alul says, it's just going to have its effects. And so you have to ask yourself, are we willing to live with the trade-offs? And this is one of the things that we don't talk about in the modern world. Are we living into, but this gets us away from the holy, but it allows us to understand that we're sort of framed within a world where we just simply have to accept tools as the solution for everything, rather than to say, well, yeah, the tools are there, but we can grapple with them from a reality that's outside of the technological society. And that reality that is outside of the technological society is the realm of, and this is the realm of the holy, is the realm of meeting God, because we've created a carefully constructed simulacrum to avoid actually meeting God, and it's making us crazy.
Yes. Well, that's what it's amazing to me, because when you look at, for instance, the research done on just people's psychological health, of course, the buzzword is mental health, but I of course think it's a much more holistic problem than just that. But all the research shows that too much time looking at a screen, too much time on social media causes everyone's mental health to tank. And so, and yet we look at all the evidence that's shown to us that says we need to rethink what we're doing. And we look at that and we just go, well, we'll just carry on. That's terrible. And let's just take a pull. So I think that's also the interesting thing, is that that's also, of course, a technological solution. Just change the chemical composition of your body in some way, possibly your brain, to deal with a problem that has been created by your own existential conditions.
Well, and a lot of it is really, and this is the other thing of modernity, is that a lot of these problems have been generated by trying to accumulate money and power at scale.
Yeah.
And so, like when you look out over the landscape of much of the work that we do now is governed by technological realities. They talk about BS office jobs, and people know that the vast majority of their life is utterly meaningless. So for a while, and you can see then the appeal of something like, where you're going to, like DEI, where we're going to now eliminate all of the problems of inequality. We're going to use this meaningless system to create we're going to do some good using this meaningless system. And we're going to use it while we're doing all of our BS jobs. We're going to, in the process of that, also fix all of the problems that humanity faces. It's a very tempting kind of a lure to do that. But, and then you get the people, well, we got to get rid of DI and just get back to doing good business or whatever, and you're like, okay, but you still haven't solved the meaning problem. And you still haven't solved the problem of, you still have to encounter God on the road, like Paul did on the road to Damascus. You still have to go out and meet God. And until you meet God, till you meet other people, until, that everything is still going to continue to be empty and meaningless.
Yeah. And I think much of the, I suppose if I wanted to give anyone a sense of how if that has happened, I often think of this. I think it's in Letters to Malcolm. C.S. Lewis writes about how he was speaking to someone, and he said, I think he was a priest of some kind, and he said this man had every reason to hate Hitler, and he saw Hitler in person, so he actually saw him in the flesh. And Lewis said to him, what did he look like? And he said, like any man, like Christ. And so what is remarkable for me about that is that he saw in the face of his enemy, he saw his savior. Not that Hitler was the savior.
No. I know what you mean. Yeah.
He was a reflection of the image of God. And I think so many of our attempts to control the world have created, I think, these incredibly divisive, incredibly dualistic ways of looking at each other and looking at the world in general. Whereas I think what the idea of the holy teaches us is that often the wonder and the terror are closer allied than we think they are, and they're not so easy to just split into camps. And I think once we've managed, and I think there are ways to do this. You suggested, quiet time before scripture and in prayer, to genuinely open yourself up to the divine and the working of the Spirit. There is actually space to transcend the constraints of the given political order, which is always so incredibly reductionistic and so anti-human. Yeah.
And like I know too from my own time in prayer, like where, this is the thing about meeting God is that, and being purposeful about it, like what they used to call ascesis, right? The sort of the purposeful endeavor to meet God is that even in your prayer and devotion time, it's not a controlled reality, right? So once you start engaging it, you might have a plan for prayer, but once you start getting really serious about spending time in the Word, because again, and this is the thing, people often misunderstand me, say, well, you're not very Protestant this way, and like, I still think it's valuable that people read the Word of God, like very, very valuable, because as we've mentioned, when you go up the mountain or you venture off into these places where you can be deceived. So how is it, what is one of the ways in which you can train yourself not to be deceived? Well, one is being part of community. That's good. So you can have people that you can bounce stuff off of, and they can say, ooh, okay, I don't think that, Duncan, I don't think, that whatever it was you encountered in that prayer time, like, yeah, that, if that happens again, maybe pull the plug on that one. You know what I mean? But it also teaches you when you're in the scriptures and you really read the Word of God and you spend time, like I say, like when people are starting, almost spend more time reading the Word. So you spend like 4 or 5 chapters a day, spend 15 or 20 minutes reading the Word. Because a lot of times we're so busy and our heads are so buzzing with like our tech. It takes you half of the time just to, where the first half, all the words just kind of go by without nothing. But it takes you the first 2 chapters before you're actually concentrating on what you're reading. But then as you go through it again and again and again, because if you read 5 chapters a day, here's the thing for people who are listening. If you read 5 chapters of the New Testament a day, you will read the New Testament in 57 days. So you think about that. If you do it every day, you read 5 chapters in the New Testament, you will read through the New Testament once every 2 months. If you do that for a year, you will have read the New Testament through 6 times. And I guarantee you, if you read through the New Testament 6 times in a year, it will change you, because you will see things that you didn't see. You'll see phrases appearing that you didn't notice before. You'll see things carried out across. You'll see things in the Gospels that are in Paul, that are in Peter, that are in Hebrews, that are in John, and you'll see them carried out through the same ideas in different words. But you'll also then begin to get a sense of what it's like when God is speaking to you. What are the kind of words that he will use? What will it look like? And then you will go through experiences like, okay, then this is, I tend to try not to share too, because it's not definitive. But last week, even, I had a 3 or 4 day period where I was in a relatively good mood or whatever. I was feeling fine and I was actually having a really good week, but I was in prayer but I felt the only thing I could really say was it like sort of the heaviness of God on me all week. Like there was like a weight, like something was pressing down upon me. And it was almost like God was trying to reach through to speak to me. But it was just, something was in the way or whatever, but all you could feel was the heaviness, like something was pressing on you. And I was otherwise in a good space, but it was just very much where you just felt very kind of solemn, like you were just everywhere I went. It didn't matter what I was doing. And I tried to just sort of carry on and do the normal family stuff while you're feeling this kind of weight on you all week. And it's just like, okay, I think this is actually working. And you're like, but so this is the kind of thing. But you have to realize that you're venturing into a territory where wild stuff will happen. Like that if you pursue God, you might actually meet him. And then, and that would be, but I think we need a lot more of this from a lot more people in different ways. And just like everybody, like if we go like Doiverd and we think of like the pistic mode, this aspect of ourselves that is created within us to meet God, that I think has withered. If people have athletic abilities or they have, artistic abilities, there will be certain people who are naturally gifted to meet God. But at the same time, you can, even if you're not an Olympic runner, you can be fit and in good shape. You can eat well. You can be, you can be in relatively good health, and you may not be a runner or whatever, but you can be fit for the tasks at hand, and you can do so. And I think the same thing, you might not go up the mountain and see the backside of God like Moses did, but at the same time, you can, in your own way, be spiritually fit enough to encounter God on a day-to-day basis or on a regular basis in your own way. That isn't maybe like Olympic level meeting God kind of thing, if you think about it that way, but it's still nonetheless a meeting of God.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's one of the things that's so interesting. A lot of, if you look at the apologetic space, and there's potentially value in that, but one of the things that one of the things that's stuck out the most for me after reading David Bentley Hart's The Experience of God, which is a really good book, is that at the end of it, he says something along the lines of those who tend to not find God simply don't look. They don't look. So they'll look for arguments, but that's also looking for the supra-rational in the only rational.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to find God, but it's because they're not looking. They're actually trying to further their sense of control and understanding. And it's quite I think it should be humiliating to people who've assumed that the best way to encounter God is to have a perfectly rational argument. And that's one of the things that I really like about Kierkegaard is his recognition that, yes, reason can take you a certain way down the road, but then at some point you're going to just have to jump into this unknown, into the dark in a way, and hope someone catches you. And I think that's the invitation, which is well worth remembering.
Well, and this is the thing too, though, and this is something that like an Italian philosopher Augusto Del Noce in his Ontologism put forward. He says, the intellectual grounding of knowledge, truth, all these things is in the encounter with God, in the metaphysical. When you shear yourself off from this, you lose contact with that. And so there is this, like the Augustinian, I think, distinction between signs and things, right? The scriptures are immensely valuable. And this is a thing, and it's very, very good for people to be reading the Word of God, as long as they understand that the Word of God is not an end unto itself, but is a sign that points them to God. So if the scriptures are pointing you beyond, to make that journey up the mountain, that's wonderful. But if you take the scriptures and you figure that book that's in your hand has everything that you need and you don't need to go up the mountain, you're then enframed in something that has now cut you off from God, which is a sad sort of. And I think this is the unfortunate, the downside of this is the downside of what's happened with Protestantism, is that unfortunately for many, the scriptures stopped being a sign that points them to God and became the end, that they're trying to pursue with ever greater perfection their refined expression of the contents of scripture. Which is, that's, yeah.
That's a little bit like, I think it's also Kierkegaard. I may be remembering this wrong, but this idea that even theology then becomes talking about God behind his back.
That sounds like something Kierkegaard would say. Yeah. But yeah, in that is a sense like, yeah, we don't actually need to talk about you. We can talk about you behind your back. And I think that's actually really, really good. Yeah. And and maybe that's a good place. And I can see that, that the family is beginning to pull on you, Duncan. And so maybe we should wind this up then. I'm glad that we didn't finish everything off, because this is the kind of thing I think that, it's one of these conversations where you nibble around the edges at it, but you never actually confront the thing itself, which unfortunately the thing itself is to confront God. Yeah. And so that I think really is the invitation, don't enframe yourself in a reality. Don't build idols, but seek the living God himself, the holy, the true holy, and because that's really what you're looking for, even if this is a very, very scary and frightening reality. I don't know if there's anything you want to leave with us before you go and before we wind this down.
The only thought I guess is maybe since we've been dealing with the idea of the simulation, is to remember that without God, everything is then a simulation. Or worse, something entirely constructed and fictional, which is what Baudrillard would call a simulacrum, where the fiction replaces the real, and the real becomes inaccessible. Baudrillard wouldn't have assumed, I think, that there was a real, but obviously we do. Yes. But it's been lovely to chat to you. Thank you so much for the conversation, which I think has been hugely edifying to me, and I hope it will be to others as well.
I hope so too. Where can people find you, Duncan, if they're looking for you? You have not only a Substack, which you can think, but also you have a couple of books that you have written too as well.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for mentioning. So yeah, I've written 2 books on G.K. Chesterton. That's my I guess my bread and butter scholarship is on Chesterton. But the one that may, I think, interest others in terms of transcending the technological frame is the one that came out earlier this year, which is called The Roots of the World: The Remarkable Prescience of G.K. Chesterton, where I basically look at Chesterton's predictions about the future, many of which have come true, all of those that I have read, and I've read a lot of Chesterton. And so I try and explain how he was able to make such remarkable predictions. And so I deal with the way he engaged with formal causality, which is outside of the modern preoccupation, I would say, with efficient causality. So there's that, and you can see me at Twitter at Duncan Reyburn, and then on Substack, which I think you'll post a link to, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, and we'll put that in the show notes. And again, go give your family well wishes from us, and have a wonderful day, Duncan. As always, it's been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you.
It's been such a joy. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Cheers.